Good evening, everybody. I'm going to ask for your attention because we're going to get our program started. So if you want to grab some more food but can listen to me at the same time, this is the perfect moment to do it. So my name is Jordan. I am Executive Director of Needle's Eye. And we are really thrilled that you're here tonight on a cold night. And I'm going to introduce our speaker to you. Hey, speed networking friends. You guys are awesome at being friendly. But I want to introduce Steve. He's pretty cool. Can I? Okay. All right, so here's how I want to introduce Steve. So Steve has a really great resume, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, but also he's somebody that is my friend that I really deeply respect. So I'm going to kind of do a two-part intro of Steve. Steve is the founder and CEO of Greenhouse Coaching, which is a leadership coaching organization right here in Richmond. And in his professional bio, I read this sentence. I'm not going to use the rest of his bio for some reason, but I like this sentence. Steve Perkins spent 12 years searching for his career calling while building superconducting particle accelerators and launching a culture transformation within a Fortune 500 company, yet he always had the feeling he wasn't making his full impact. Which is what I would feel if I was building superconducting particle accelerators. Like, I'm clearly not making much of an impact. So Steve goes on to earn his certification as an executive leadership coach, and he founded his business in 2007. And he coaches and podcasts and writes about finding calling, making an impact, finding balance, all these great things, being a great, impactful leader. But the personal reasons that I'm excited that Steve is going to speak to us start with this. So I got to know Steve over a cup of coffee a few years ago. And you know how you have those experiences where you meet somebody and within the first 30 minutes to an hour, you've really connected with that person. You're like, oh, I trust this person. Like we're vibing, like we're hitting it off. That was me and him. None of you nodded. So I'm sorry you've never had that experience. You don't trust anybody. Kevin, thank you. You're the only one. But if you've had that experience, you know what that's like, where you're like, there's something about this person I really like. And that was Steve for me. Maybe it was mutual, let's hope. And so a few years later, when I needed a leadership coach for Needle's Eye, that's who I wanted to work with. And we sat down for our first meeting, or kind of an exploratory meeting. And I basically was like, look, here's all that I'm dealing with in the ministry and in leadership and where I need help. But also, this is what's going on in my family. This is what's going on in my marriage. This is kind of what's going on between me and God. These are where all the places I'm overly stressed and I don't know what to do about it. And we could just talk about all of it. And I loved working with Steve because all of those things were on the table. And the integration of your faith and your work, your family, and the rest of your life and your vocation were all things that we dug into. And it was really great to talk to him about those things. And now, in the context, we're not working together anymore. Or maybe I'd be paying him to be here. That would be strange if I was paying him as a coach to do this. But we became really good friends. And what I've learned about Steve as when he was my coach, but also as my friend, is he is an exceptional business leader. He is really, really smart about his business and about leadership. But much more importantly, he loves God a lot and is very serious about his relationship with Jesus and really works hard to be a great husband and father and friend. And he's just an awesome guy with a lot of great thoughts. So join me in welcoming Steve Perkins. How was that for an intro? Is that pretty good?
I hate being introed.
Oh, no. So when we approached Steve about speaking to us on this topic, knowing that he had a lot to offer, you said you would rather do it kind of interview style, so that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay?
I love it. I think a conversation is fun.
And we could pretend that I don't know some of your main points, but we've been kind of talking about this for years, and then more recently about tonight.
Yeah.
So I know you have these two kind of core concepts you want to dive into. Why don't you start with those two and kind of share them with the group?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. Good to hang out with you guys. I think this is a really cool event. And when Jordan was asking me to do this and this concept of work and rest, I mean, I think about this stuff all the time in my personal life, but then also the work I do. And so immediately what clicked in my head and what we talked about was this sentence, so I wrote it down so I wouldn't mess it up. I said, here's what I think the problem is. I think the problem is that our work is not nearly restful enough. And at the same time, I think we turn our rest into work too. Yeah. So what happens is our whole life is working and working too hard, and then we wonder why we're all burning out and struggling in different areas. So, so I thought that could be a good thing to anchor to and talk about, is these two almost ironic dynamics, that work isn't restful, and I think it should be, and that we turn our rest into work as well.
So we've even talked about that we turn our spiritual lives into a place where we have to work really hard. So let's start with the second part of what you said, that we turn rest into an area where we have to press really hard and be very effortful while we're trying to rest. You can go into Christian life or not, but talk to us about that. Let's start with your personal life or work. Let's start with your story and we'll go from there. So jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, something I've learned more and more over the years is that I think our relationship with God should be the ultimate rest. But if you're at all like me, and my story is, I actually turned it into really hard work that was difficult to keep up with, and that actually ruined the relationship. So if I go back to when I was not conscious of this dynamic at all, I lived as if this Christian thing was like a checklist, my Christian checklist. And there are all these things that you're supposed to do, and that no one has maybe said you've got this checklist, but it's like, there are all these things you're supposed to do, and you got to try harder and do better and not be so bad, and then try harder at that. And it was to the point where even when I would hear somebody give a message about like the topic of grace, my takeaway was, okay, I got to try harder at that. I got to do better at grace. Okay, a bunch of notes, like I got to try harder at grace too. Now, like even that goes on the checklist, which is so ironic when you think about it. Fast forward to now, when I have some more awareness about that, I'm growing in that area. I think often I'll notice when people use the word gotta or shoulda. And almost stop them or stop myself.
The word should like ruined my life for 20 years because it just hounded me. I should be this way. I should do this thing.
What did it look like for you?
For me, it was like a slave driver in my brain, just lashing me to try harder or getting mad at me that I wasn't trying hard enough, right? And it was every area of life, but specifically actually Christian parts of life, like faith parts of life, where what's wrong with you? Why didn't you? You should. And so the idea of, because I knew, probably like many people, I also grew up with the checklist, but at some point as an adult, you go, okay, I don't need a checklist anymore. It's easy to say that. It's really difficult to then live in freedom. Because at least for me, and I'm curious if this was your situation, I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped like hounding myself to be a good Christian. It was like, if I stop trying that hard, is it all just going to fall apart? Was really what I worried about.
Even the irony of the environment I was often in, we would talk about things like, it's by faith, not by works. And then like have a bashing session about the Pharisees, and it's like, and yet the very next sentence was actually about how we have to try harder to be by faith. And it's like, I've had this total eye-opening experience the past few years of my life of realizing how completely backwards that is, that I'm still making it all about me. The checklist is all about me, and can I perform better, and can I achieve? And so for me, it came to this point of realizing, well, that's why I'm not experiencing that joy and that peace that is supposed to happen, right? Like, how come people aren't experiencing that if this is real? Like, there should be peace and joy. And now experiencing a lot more of that in my life, realizing because it was in the letting go of, trying to be the achiever of the checklist.
So how does that work? How do you actually let that go? What's that look like for you? Because one of the things we're going to talk about is you're a very focused person, you're a very structured person, you think a lot about, you help other people think about how to use their time well and all these kinds of things. How in the context of being that kind of a deep thinker, strategic thinker, but also kind of type A personality, do you do that without losing your mind, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anyone else ever think about this topic or have wrestled with this? Okay, so I hate hearing my bio. It's always so uncomfortable, right? But the reality is my background in engineering does give me a unique perspective as I work with people.
Can you hear us over the rain, by the way? Are you guys okay? Okay.
Okay, we could just come down and sit with you guys. Okay, so I think for me, the tension I felt as I was starting to realize this dynamic and how crazy it is. Like I'm doing this checklist thing. I'm trying to, like, I'm actually like turning the whole gospel thing on its head.
Yeah.
That's about freedom. That's actually about freedom and rest, not experiencing any of that.
Yeah.
My initial, like where my brain goes first is, okay, but how? How does this work? And it would drive me crazy when I heard people talk about this topic and it's just supposed to be inspirational, like just trust God, just like receive. I'm like, how? How does that work? So Tuesday at like 10 o'clock while I'm at work, how does that happen?
Yeah.
And I kind of obsess over that part of it because I feel like people skip it and it's just always inspirational. So, I mean, I wrote this down because this has been so big for me. I think that one of the things that comes down to in my life is this act of receiving throughout the day. So if the reality is that my identity is in God and that I don't have to achieve anything, like he's already done it for me, I actually have to do, now my work is not to achieve, my work is to receive that.
Okay.
And that happens all throughout the day. So let me give you an example, because I worry about money a lot. And now that I run a company, I'm always worrying about money.
Yeah.
And so what it looks like often for me is, okay, I'm driving to work in the morning and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like there isn't enough money with this thing, and I gotta do something, and I gotta try harder, and I gotta make some stuff happen so that we can fix that problem. Is like stopping myself in that moment and having a little prayer moment where I'm like, okay, actually, I don't have to do anything. Like, actually, everything's already good. And I have 0 things to worry about today. Yeah. Now, this sounds crazy to some people. I said this to a coworker one time, and she was like, you're nuts. There's so much we have to worry about. And I was like, but really? Like, actually, hold on. If I believe this is true, then the truth is I don't have anything to worry about. Mm-hmm. And so let me like stop and take that in and try to actually like receive that as if it's real, and then go about my day as if that's real. And then the next time I'm worrying again, like stop and like receive it again. To me, that became the type of thing, how it looked, because it's like talking about it once on a Sunday or at a, on a thing like this, that's not gonna get it in me.
Yeah.
Like that's just still being head knowledge. But if I'm actually trying to think about it and receive it and take it in as if it's real during the time where I'm experiencing worry or unrest, then that makes it real. So a good mentor said this to me once. I love it. I think you said this to me one time too. Oh. He was like, the reality is it's about your identity. And your identity leads to beliefs, and beliefs lead to behaviors. Yeah. The problem is when we jump straight to behavior modification, which we'd love to do in the church, and then we wonder why it doesn't work. Well, because our identity is actually still rooted in something different. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do with this kind of a practice in the day-to-day is like change and like receive what my actual real identity is. And then that will naturally change.
Well, and it's hard because in the workplace, especially when you have stress or deadlines or a coworker or a boss is upset with you, your identity is kind of poked at, right? And so you find yourself going, or your identity feels like it's on the line. Mm-hmm. If I don't handle this correctly, or if I make a mistake here, if the business takes a step back financially, what are people going to think of me? What am I going to think of myself? And so I find I have to reverse engineer, and I have to go, okay, I'm feeling like I need to do this, or I just did this thing. What am I believing, and where is that coming from? Like, I have to go backward. And I find, maybe this is where we'll get to the intersection of this and the work piece, is I have to be working effectively enough that I have created the margin to stop and to be able to take 15 minutes and go and sort of autopsy my own beliefs and behaviors back to my identity. Like I actually have to be effective in my work so that when those moments come, I have the breathing room to say, let me step back for a minute.
Yeah. Well, and there you go. You're hitting on the major theme, which is we either think it's all on us to like produce the results, or it's just like, just trust God, just pray, and it'll just happen.
Yeah.
And you don't do anything. And I keep going, no. It's somewhere in the middle there. Like you still have to put in effort, but your effort is not to produce the results.
Right.
Your effort is to create the space for that thing to happen. This is like, I don't know about you, this messed with my head for years. Yeah. I'm like, well, what do you mean? As Americans, we're like, I gotta have a thing to do. Check it off the list. And it's like, but we misapply our effort so often. Mm-hmm. If you really stop and look at your life, you'll notice this everywhere. It's like we apply our effort to thinking like, I have to be the one. It's on me to like make the thing happen. And yet, that's not what our identity says.
Well, so let me pitch an idea to you. And so we've never talked about this. See what you think. So the value of there are challenges of working remotely or hybrid work situations, but the value is you can kind of figure out where in the course of your day or your week you're going to fit your work, and it gives you some freedom and flexibility to go to the grocery store or spend time with a friend or these different things, right? Okay. So I was taught, maybe you were, in the checklist model, that your relationship with God had to fit into these very specific spaces. So you must have like an hour-long great quiet time every morning, and if you don't, you're a bad Christian, and there's no way you can interact with God the rest of the day. You've sort of ruined your day. That's hyperbolic, but kind of that's what I was told.
Same.
Yeah. So, but there's a way. So there's a way though to say, because it's a relationship, I'm going to walk with God throughout my day. Yeah, I should probably start my day in prayer or in scripture, or because that centers me and it gives him the first fruits. But it doesn't have to stay. If I need to do that today for 10 minutes instead of for 30 minutes because I need to jump on and answer some emails, that's okay. The Lord's still there 3 hours from now. When not that we're putting him on the back burner, but our faith can sort of, our faith is part of all of our lives, but those rhythms and disciplines can kind of fit into all these things, and the other things can kind of be shouldered aside to accommodate, because the Lord's in control of your work and your output and your like if he's really in control, one of the best things you can do is pause your output to surrender it to him, because he's the one that will bring it to fruition anyway.
Yeah. I mean, another perfect example of where we turn our relationship with God into more work. Because, okay, so here's how it went for me. Some of you may have been here when Tommy Thompson spoke, and I can credit this whole story to him because I was feeling burnout in my faith life, and I was talking about prayer, and I was like, same thing. I was like, I don't have enough time. I'm supposed to like pray for an hour every morning, and there's all these things got to pray for all these people and all this stuff, and he goes, then stop praying. And I was like, what? You can't say that. You're like my spiritual mentor. And he's like, just stop praying then. And I'll just never forget it, because I'm sitting there going, well, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So as we get more into the conversation, he goes, how about this instead? Instead of you talking at God, which is me working, me turning the faith into work, I got to say a bunch of stuff to God that's on my Christian checklist, prayer checklist. What if you just sat there and listened instead? Which is receiving, and it's this weird, like as Americans, we think receiving is too passive. We got to be active. And it's like, no, that's an active thing. I am putting myself in a posture to receive. So I flew back from Atlanta last night, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, I am not getting myself from Atlanta to Richmond. This plane is, hopefully. But that doesn't mean I'm passive. My job is to get to the airport, go through all the things that I hate going through, get on the plane, sit down, be a passenger, and receive the fact that flight is taking me to Richmond. So it's like I still participate, but the work that I do is just receiving. The work isn't like getting me from here to there. I think that's so much of how it goes. Like, what if you just stop talking at God all the time and just like listen for once? What would happen? So I did that for a year. And I mean, that was, one of the many steps that started to shift this for me. And we always joke about it. I'm like, Tommy, you told me to stop praying.
What a good Christian leader.
What a great Christian
So
leader.
I had a similar conversation with a mentor. It was my pastor at the time, maybe 10 years ago. And so I'm in ministry, and I came to him and I said, okay, William, I am being told that I'm supposed to be, you're a human being, you're not a human doing, you need to slow down, you need to rest. But every hero of the faith that I read about got up at like 4 a.m. every morning, prayed for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Charles Spurgeon would preach like 20 sermons a week from the time he was 20. Like, when I look at the people that seem like they're having a huge impact, they have no boundaries. They're not resting. Like, what are you telling me? Because there is this push-pull of be wise so that you have a sustainable pace, and you're not promised tomorrow, so you can be like, oh, I'll get to this, I'll be so healthy that when I'm 60, I can do it. You may not be 60.
Yeah.
So I'm like, William, what do I do? And he looked at me and he goes, Jordan, how do you know that all those famous Christian leaders were actually honoring God? And I was like, what are you talking, like what? Charles Spurgeon was not honoring God. What are you talking about, right? And he was like,
yeah.
Did God need them to run themselves into the ground to do what he wanted them to do? Or is it possible that they could have done all the same things in a way that was actually a lot healthier for them, and God could have achieved the same fruit? And I was like, okay, you like theology juked me. Sure, I'm sure that's true. But he's like, why do you think that you running yourself into the ground is what God wants you to do? Has he told you to do that? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay, if he tells you to do it, you should do it. But if he doesn't, why are you just choosing that?
Yeah, assuming that everything that hero person did was the right way or perfect. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I think this stuff takes a lot of like really looking honestly at yourself, but I think it's worth doing in my experience. I mean, I'm still on this journey of unpacking how come I turn my relationship with God into so much work when it's supposed to be the ultimate rest. But my suspicion is a lot of us have a version of that. So as a coach, something I do often, and I think we had these kind of conversations too, is talk about a spectrum. Again, Americans, we love to make things binary, but almost everything's a spectrum. So if I'll speak for myself, and you can speak for yourself. For me, I tend towards the overachieving side of the spectrum, not the lazy side. So for me, if I am taking on this new posture, I'm almost never at risk of being too lackadaisical. If I'm trying really hard to adjust it, I'm probably coming more towards the middle when I think I'm extreme, you know? So if you're someone who tends towards more laziness, then maybe what I'm saying here is maybe it applies differently to you. Maybe, you need to think about activating more. But I think it's important to not worry, okay, well, I'm supposed to get up at 4 a.m. because these other people did. Well, maybe that actually wasn't a great approach. Maybe they were trying to achieve more than receive. So I think that's just an interesting dynamic.
And the world is different than it was, right? And just different seasons. I mean, hundreds of years ago, it looked different than it does now. Let's go, so you kind of started going there. Let's get into some of this piece of, we don't really make work very restful or sustainable, but there are ways to do that, which I imagine people would appreciate. So why don't you get into some of that, and if you have a personal story, great, but let's get into some of the practicality and then how following Jesus kind of integrates into that.
Sure. Yeah, so I really believe that work can be more restful and should be more restful. And I think what it comes down to is the difference between being reactive versus intentional in our work. So we're a marketing-driven society. It's funny, Jeremy, you made the comment about politics. I'm like, politicians don't run the world today. Marketing runs the world. And marketing, billions and billions of dollars are spent to change how we think and behave, right? So it's important for us to understand that. If marketing is running us, marketing is built for us to be reactive. So it takes a lot of intention to shift that dynamic, to be intentional with our work. And I've noticed for myself, yesterday I was working with a CEO of this big company, and it was all about getting intentional with his time. He was running to the ground. He showed up to our all-day meeting with 2 hours of sleep. And it's because he was reacting to everyone's requests. Well, just like marketing, every request, thousands of requests a day coming at him, and he never was able to create the space he needed. So is shifting to that intentionality.
What does that look like for somebody who doesn't control their own schedule? They have the type of job where a supervisor or the business itself dictates their time versus perhaps the CEO of this larger company has some level of autonomy on how he schedules his time.
It's such a great question. And what I've found over and over is like our agency, I guess you could say, like the control we have over these things is usually much bigger than we think.
Okay.
So even the most extreme scenario where someone is, I had a job one time where I was working in a factory, like on an assembly line. Everything's dictated down to the minute. There's no freedom in that kind of space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out, like I remember having a conversation with my boss about a change that I was wanting to make.
Yeah.
And we talked through it, and it had to be a little bit of a negotiation, but we found some middle ground there and made a change. It's like there's so much more influence you have than you might think, and usually it just comes through a conversation. But again, the conversation is an intentionality.
Are you finding as you work with CEOs and business owners that if their employees have proven they can do the work well, the boss is more open to them kind of flexing how they do it or having a little more freedom, or no?
Well,
or does it depend?
What I find is it's actually a matter of very few people in any kind of leadership have like 100% authority or clarity.
Okay.
So they have no basis to say, you need to do this or that. Everything's negotiable.
Okay.
And so usually it just comes down to the conversation. If you bring up the conversation, there's probably some wiggle room to make changes or be creative. It's just that it's so rare for people to bring up the conversation.
Okay.
But what's interesting to me about all this in the context of this conversation is I think we can over spiritualize our spiritual life. And so we're like, oh, spirituality is about like, church and prayer and Bible and gatherings like this. And I'm like, I think a lot of our spiritual life shows up in how we manage our calendar and how we like create rhythms in our relationships and our marriage. I think it has to do with things I deal with a lot, which is like, how do you manage workflow at your work? I think it's a very spiritual topic because to your point, it's a thing we spend our most waking hours of our life at and dictates so much of our rhythms and how we
talk about delegation. Steve has you have this really great way you think about delegating, and you even maybe created your own model that you use with people. Or I remember we walked through this thing and I was like, I've never heard anybody talk like that, but it really was helpful.
Okay, I'm passionate about a lot of nerdy topics.
Go for it.
Well, my take on delegation is I think we tend to say, if you're in any kind of leadership or manager role, you say, well, it's just easier to do it myself. It takes too long to delegate.
My team will tell you I'm terrible at this. I'm not a good delegator, so maybe we should work together some more.
Yeah, and then if you're on the receiving end of it, it's like, I wish I could have more ownership of that thing or whatever the case is, but I get micromanaged. Yeah. So with delegation, the key is to shift the belief. It's not true that it's easier for me to do it myself. I'm actually limiting the impact of what we can do as a team, and I am squashing the potential of the people who need to be empowered. And so I think it actually comes down to this. I think this is what you're referring to, this idea I call delegate the thinking. And you can do this if you're a manager or if you're the one being delegated to. It's like, don't talk about tasks and projects yet. Talk about the thinking that came before the task or the project. Yeah. So, if you were planning this event, Jordan, the first thing you do while you're driving to work or taking a walk in the shower, you start thinking through like, okay, what do we got to do? Who, what, when, where, why, all these questions. It's to stop yourself, stop thinking, and then hand it off to me and say, Steve, could you do some of that thinking for me? Like, come up with some ideas. Answer the who, what, when, where, how, just like a first draft, and then come back to me and we'll chat about it. Yep. So the beauty is like now I'm owning it because I have creative I have my own creative juices flowing.
Yeah.
And I just always think of it like the stuff in our day-to-day life. Like we take ownership of our pets and our car and our house, and then we don't at work. Why? Well, because we don't have creative ownership in it. We're not part of coming up with the idea in the first place.
When it strikes me that okay, so you're exercising a similar muscle there as we're talking about exercising with God, which is in that scenario, I have handed off something to you. The easy thing to do is then just take it back, right? Like, thank you, now I'll just take control again, and great. And so the work is to say, great, you're doing a great job, keep going. And with the Lord, we like surrender things to him and then we take it back. Like, I trusted you, but maybe not that much, and you're not answering me as quickly as I want, so maybe I'm not going to receive anymore. Maybe I'm going to hold on to that one a little bit because, God, maybe you're going to handle it, maybe you won't quite the way I want to. What do you, as we move toward wrapping up, and then we'll do some Q&A, what do you find helps you to relinquish? I mean, how do you surrender to God or even delegate well to a person and resist that temptation to take ownership back?
Yeah. I love that question. I want to think about that one more too. But I think it actually is where, to me, these two topics tie together. That we turn our rest into work, and we don't rest, and we make our work not restful. It's that if we can do this thing of being more intentional in our work, the delegation, the calendar, it's like there's 100 topics I could cover on this, but if we do the intentional things in our work, it creates space. And then the space allows us to do that whole receiving thing and be present and not grip and try to control and manage and cajole everything into existence. But the two go together. That's why I think all these tactical work things like delegation is very spiritual, because I see it all the time, leaders who don't delegate well, then they wonder why they're burnt out, and then they're spiritual, if they're trying to have a relationship with God, like, why do you think it's suffering? Well, you have no time to think or breathe. So how about we delegate better, organize your calendar, and then put a block on your calendar to take a walk every day. Like, that would help your relationship with God way more than going to church on Sunday and being more busy doing that. So I think that, to me, that's where this stuff plays out is, let's take the first step as getting intentional in our work in a way that creates space for us to breathe and be present with God.
Yeah, so Needles Eye has been creating space for these working well, resting right conversations for about 5 months, which you may or may not know. So you're coming in sort of in the middle of it. And we intentionally didn't call it work-life balance because that makes them feel oppositional. But one of the first ideas we introduced was this idea of a pendulum, that the further back it swings, the further it can swing the other way. If you rest well, you can work harder. And if you work well, you can rest better. And they're very synergistic. And our spiritual life is part of that too. So thank you, Steve. Let's give it up for Steve. Thank you, my friend. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Do you want me to kick it too, or do you want to come up and do it? All right, so we're going to spend some time doing discussion around your tables. So if you're sitting alone, maybe grab a friend or two or three. And on your tables, there are these little business cards that say Spiritual Shots. They have a QR code. And if you go there, they're going to have discussion questions prepared for you. And we're going to spend, Jeremy, 15, 20 minutes on that? 15-ish, 20 minutes. And during that time, that 15 to 20 minutes you're about to do, you can also text your questions for Steve. And that phone number that you text is also on that QR code. So text in your questions, and we'll do some Q&A with Steve, but do some discussion around your tables and make some new friends. Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much for having table discussions. I hope that was meaningful, helpful to get to know each other, helpful for you to just kind of reflect for yourself on everything that Steve and Jordan talked about. Now is the opportunity where you get to pester this guy with any question you want to know. So his routing numbers, his Enneagram, anything. Just go ahead and text the number on that QR code. Send in the questions. We've got a couple to get us started, but please feel free to keep sending them in. Otherwise, I'm just going to start asking him really embarrassing stories from his past. Could get weird. Okay, well, first off, let me just say, Steve, thank you. I had a great conversation down here with these two. I was talking to them about the concept we shared at the beginning of the idea that we often we often turn rest into work. Work is not restful, and then we turn our rest into work.
Yeah.
And that is something that like hits me really hard because truthfully, I think about, you guys talked a lot about checklists, and for me it's like checklists are efficiency.
Yeah.
You're supposed to do that. Like efficiency is all about accomplishing as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so you can then go accomplish more.
Yeah.
And I do that with my rest. I'm like, okay, cool. So from this time to this time, this is how I'm going to rest. But then I'm going to feel pressure to move past that because once the clock hits that, I'm going to move on to this other thing I have planned. And then my whole rest day becomes filled with pressure. And at the end of it, I'm like, dude, I'm just as tired as I was before.
Yeah.
So one, it was really kind of thought-provoking, challenging, convicting for me to go, okay, how do I turn my rest into receiving? Like just receiving. That is huge.
Isn't that helpful to make it an active thing? Because
Yeah.
I'm a maximizer. So we're talking about personalities on the Strengths Finder.
Right.
I'm the ultimate maximizer type. So I overfunction all the time.
Yep.
And so it was really hard to think about rest as just stopping. Now I do think there's a lot of value in that. But it was a little more helpful to think of it as a shift of attention and energy to something that's a different mode,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge like perspective shift, just completely.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most frequent things I do and that I'm always suggesting to people is building walks into my workday. Because I worked in corporate America for a long time, and I was in, sitting at desk type of jobs on the laptop. For the last 7 years, I've been unpacking my back problems that came out of that, And so just movement. It was actually my wife's dad that first planted the seed because he worked at a company that made office chairs. And he was like, I was like, what office chair do I need? And he's like, actually, don't worry about the chair. Just like get up and walk throughout the day.
Oh, wow.
And, these stupid, simple things, it was so novel to me. I'm like, walk during the day. Never thought of that.
But like even that, we've turned it into standing desks and under desk treadmills.
Exactly. I know.
We have found every possible way to take a chance to rest, a chance for a break, and said, no, but here's how to be actually at work while doing it.
Right. So here's a suggestion. Take a walk and give yourself an assignment of something to just think about.
Yeah.
So if anything hit you tonight or was interesting or thought-provoking, write it down. Literally tonight, schedule a time during your work week to take a walk and think about that thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But now it's like, instead of saying, I'm going to create space that'll just be there, it's filling the space with something different so that nothing else can kind of crowd in.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's value in like space where you're just creating space. But in this work setting we're talking about, I find it helpful to fill it with something different.
Yeah.
It's like it crowds the other things out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's cool. Well, here, let's get into some of these questions. And this one actually is on the topic of what we're talking about. It says, so resting well and numbing out. And I think, numbing out's like, I've gotten to the point where I just have to like stop feeling. I can't feel anything. Resting well and numbing out can feel so similar. How would you differentiate between the two?
Oh my gosh. Whoever wrote that has to come up and share the answer because I don't know. I don't know. Like for me, I find that at the end of a long work day, I just need to like watch a show. And then people go, oh, well, blue screen light will ruin your sleep. I'm like, actually, it helps me sleep a lot because I find that if I watch something with a story, it takes my mind off of everything from the day and I can simmer down. So I don't know. I'm probably not the person to ask for this. I don't think it's like such a strong, these two poles that are against each other. I think there's some overlap. But for the purposes of this thing tonight, I do think that we make our rest into work. It's more like when we're trying to be present with God, we turn it into a performance that we have to do.
Yeah.
So my question would be, okay, well, what does rest look like for you? Good example is vacations. Like the word literally comes from the idea of to vacate.
Yeah.
Like we consider rest equals vacations. Go on vacation and just numb out. And it's like, well, sure, that might be one type of rest, but there's other types of rest. Jordan was saying earlier, like when him and I have a good conversation, for both of us, that's very life-giving.
Yeah.
That is a form of rest for both of us. But like he said, well, that takes the effort of us scheduling the get together, that's the step that we don't do when we just want to watch a show and veg out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's helpful to think about like, what does rest look like for you, and what does vacation look like for you?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And yes, I love going to the beach, but sometimes I actually need vacations to do other things, like walk around the fan and think about interesting topics.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. One thing we've through Needle's Eye over this like working well, resting right theme, I've talked about is rest just looks different for people. Like for some people, rest is I was joking with them, like I'm gonna sit on my couch and watch a Great British Bake Off. Like that's rest for me. For other people, it's like, oh no, I'm gonna go hike the hardest possible black diamond triple whatever trail I can find. And both of them come away from those vastly different experiences, rest and restored in different ways. And it's amazing that you really have to discern and discover like, what is rest for you as an individual, and then build it in, because it's not going to happen otherwise.
I think that's such a great point. I mean, what I think about a lot is the fact that right now we're in this crazy point in history. Like people in 100 years are going to point to this time and be like, this was insane.
Yeah.
We were rethinking the way everything works. And the biggest one is the way work works. So to your point, like our idea of rest and vacation came out of this industrialization age where it was like we knew that the jobs were like sucking your soul dry.
Yeah.
So we had to give you something to motivate you to do the job. Well, we gave you this package of like salary and benefits and 2 weeks of vacation a year.
Yeah.
That was an invented idea. But we think that's just like the way it's always been. It's like that was invented. That was a very recent idea.
Yeah,
Work was never that way before. So the idea of 2 weeks where I go on vacation a year was also just like this made up thing that probably isn't how I want to live. Why don't I rethink what vacation looks like to me?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but that was a new thought to me a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like, and of course there's limits on what I'm able to do, but it's helpful to rethink, what does it mean for me?
Yeah.
What does it look like? For me, I don't like that 2 weeks a year. I like little pops throughout, and then like maybe a big chunk of time.
Yeah.
So this past 2 summers, I scheduled days throughout July and August on my calendar to go to the ACAC Short Pump rooftop pool.
Oh, yeah.
The best kept
That's
secret
a
in
beautiful
Richmond.
place. It's like an honor to be invited into that.
It's an
space.
all-inclusive resort during the weekdays. No one's there. There's a bartender just for you. It's like, you don't even see the traffic because it's just above the, you can't even see Short Pump. It's like beautiful.
It's the best way to experience Short Pump is not to see Short Pump.
Exactly. So I would go up there on a Monday and just kind of chill up there during the day. Sometimes even do work, but it was super restful for me.
awesome.
More restful than my vacations.
Yeah.
Where I had all kinds of logistics and travel and fighting with my wife around how we are going to do vacation, and then like trying to visit family and sleep in their guest room and not get any sleep because the pillow sucks. It's like, I found the Monday at ACAC Rooftop the most restful vacation I've ever had. But yeah, it took kind of stopping and rethinking what it looks like.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me, does your perspective on all of these things, so everything we kind of talked about tonight, does it change or impact how you view success in your business?
Oh, that's a good question. Does this stuff we're talking about impact how you view success? Okay, you guys got another hour for this one? Or for those who want to stay behind. I'm a big proponent of doing the exercise of writing in a notebook, 10 years from now, what would I love my life to look like? And not expecting that it goes that way. I've had a lot of things happen in life that were terrible and didn't expect it to happen. But I believe God created us to have dreams and interests and ambitions for a reason. So to write it down, because we often don't know what we want. And if you just do the act of writing and don't stop, a lot of times like the good stuff comes out that, you've been taught to push down and it's not realistic. It starts to come out and you see like what you want, what you would love life to look like in the future. And you can think about different categories, friends and spiritual and work and health. And so I am a big believer that should define what you think success means. And so there's a lot of like literature coming out around redefining success.
Yeah.
But I think it's still trying to make it too cookie cutter. Like, well, success isn't about a certain money or title. It's about this instead. I'm like, well, what is it for you? I mean, it's probably really unique, like the things that you desire and that you would find fulfilling are probably really unique to you compared to me. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that exactly answers it, but I think, again, it's being intentional with your time and creating that space is the only way you're going to even start to think about that stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, one thing somewhat along the lines of that is, and this is, I'm not sponsored by, but I do use a journaling app, and it's called just One Day.
Oh,
One Day
I
Journal.
love that.
And so actually, I started using it about a year ago, and the reason why I bring this up is because you've talked about kind of just letting yourself flow. Give me a blank page and my mind goes blank. It's like I don't know what to do with this. Like I got nothing. But it gives you prompts.
Yeah.
And it's like a prompt is all I need. And
Yeah.
I'll start writing and then it's just flow of consciousness. It pours out. And what I just realized is like Facebook memories. Like
Yeah.
a year later, it's like 1 year ago today, this was your journal entry.
So cool.
And it's been fascinating for me to look back over the past few months and say, oh my gosh, 1 year ago today, I was wrestling with the same thing I'm still wrestling with now. Or other days I have 1 year ago today, I was wrestling with this thing that I can now confidently say I've resolved.
That's cool.
And it's been really cool to be able to like look back and see how my life has progressed, how my spirituality has progressed, all that stuff. But it takes what you're describing. It takes that moment of like, let me
It's
just
so simple, but it's really hard to do it.
it's like I'm just gonna mean girl word vomit all over this thing, and it actually is gonna give me a chance to have the catharsis that I've denied myself for so long.
And that's why all this stuff ties together tonight. Like what it required first was you putting the time block on your calendar to do that thing. Because when in a normal busy week are you like, I just really feel like reflecting on my life for a while. And I mean, some people are wired to do that, but most people find that hard. So, okay, so write this down if you want a prompt for this kind of thing. Here's a prompt. So you just write down, it's 2034. I'm blank years old, whatever your age would be at that point in time. And life has become exactly how I hoped it would be. Already people are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then the next sentence is I wake up Monday morning and ... So it's 2034, I'm blank years old, life's become everything I hoped it would be. I wake up Monday morning and then just start walking through what the day in the life looks like.
Wow.
But write it present tense, like what my Monday looks like. Most ideal Monday you can imagine. And something about, to your point, the prompt, it helps to think through like literally hour by hour. Okay, I mean, I've done this. Like mine starts off with, I wake up without an alarm clock.
Yeah.
Because my life has always been like jolt awake and immediately stressed about all the things I'm behind on. It's like, and I roll downstairs, pour a cup of coffee, and it's like the steam is coming off it, and I get to like sip it for a minute in peace.
Yeah.
Because at one point in my life, that was a dream. That was like a long shot.
That's like the pinnacle of existence.
Yeah. Now every
Coffee
morning
and peace.
almost is like that. I mean, it's like, well, that didn't happen on accident. It happened because I was thinking about, oh, that would be something I would love to do, and then it took a long time to like build toward that. But yeah, try that prompt out. And I mean, I would actually love to hear if you do it, what happens.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good idea. So here's everyone here, you guys always played Would You Rather? You know, the questions are like, would you rather always be 2 hours early or 5 minutes late? So I have a really intense, I love this question, but really intense Would You Rather for you. So would you rather advance the mission of God quickly and energetically, but have a late, unrecoverable burnout? Or would you rather work to support the mission of God over the course of your life, but not realize fulfillment until your deathbed? That hit home with a lot of people.
What is this?
Because it's a would you rather. It's extremes on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what I've said tonight, the second one. I mean, I think for a big chunk of my life, though, I would have said the first one.
Yeah.
Because there's that checklist thing. That's what I'm obligated to do.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say the second one now.
Yeah. Can you dive into it just a little bit?
I don't know. I don't like cliches, but I do think there's a lot to that whole. It's in the process and the journey, not the destination thing. I do love the destinations though.
Yeah. Oh,
but I think there's something to that. You know, we've seen a lot of fantastical implosions in the headlines these past several years. And I think it's a result of this stuff we're talking about tonight. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
Because we praised and we rewarded the like outward, look at the big awesome thing you're doing,
Right.
versus like who you're becoming on the inside. So, so yeah, I think that's gosh, that was a deep one.
That was. That really was. You know, when Jordan and I have been friends since, I don't know, 2016 or so. So we've had a number of conversations as well. And I remember one that's always stuck with me is we were at Boulevard Burger and Brew, which recently had a car drive through it. So don't try and eat there. They're shut down for now. But I remember we sat down and had a conversation about, me in particular, I remember growing up and you had like heroes of the faith. And it's like Jordan talked about. It's the people who just absolutely murdered themselves in order to glorify God. And there is something to be said for that. They did a lot of great work. People were impacted. Many had fall from graces in the past few years that I think are pretty devastating if they were like a faith hero of yours. But we can't forget that God is just as glorified by the father who is a diligent worker and a really supportive dad. And you can't forget about the pastor whose congregation never grows bigger than 12 because of the demographics of where they live, but they're faithful over a long period of time. And how those stories we may not hear and we may not celebrate, but that actually is still glorifying and faithful work. But I think for me at least, and I'm going to guess for a lot of us, we'd rather be the splashy one. We'd rather be the one that says, this is instant gratification. I can see the fruit of my labor.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like to interrogate these different like Christian words that we have, like faithfulness, because the understanding I was given of this word is if you're faithful, that means you're like crushing it and you're killing yourself for it.
Yeah.
That's what faithful means. Well, upon further review of the word, it actually doesn't mean that. What it means is sticking with God every step of the way and not giving up on him.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean doing anything for him. It means sticking with. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. It's like that's a receiving thing. That's not a performing thing.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, if anyone here's heard Dallas Willard, me and Jordan were just talking about it. He was talking about the idea of Jesus saying, "Come to me." All who come to me have to be like a kid.
Yeah.
They have to be like a child. And so again, well, I think subconsciously we've taken this image of like, well, that means I gotta like die to myself. That means I gotta like beat myself up and I have to suffer in order to be like, that's so me focused.
Yeah.
Actually, what a kid does, what I notice my kid does all the time is she shows up in the morning and she's like, yay, what adventure do you have for me today, Dad? And like she trusts that I have the money taken care of. We've got food plans. We've got transportation for her. We have 10 play dates that she's all gonna have and still not have enough fun today. And she's gonna like watch shows in between.
Yeah.
Like we have taken care of everything. And all she has to do is show up and enjoy it.
Yeah.
I really more and more, the older I get, I'm like, that's actually like what God's calling us to, is to actually just enjoy life with him.
Yeah.
But that sounds so, that's like, how could you say such a thing? We have to work hard. We have to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. He said you have to be like a child. He said like, my yoke's easy, my burden's light. I don't know. The way I was living with him was not light
No.
or burdenless. Like, I just think we got to interrogate these words. Like, faithful. What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And so that to me is worth creating space to think about.
Yeah. That's huge. That's awesome. Well, here, let me give you one more question.
Okay.
One more question, kind of, and this one's very personal to you. At this stage in your life, your career, as a father, as a husband, everything that kind of wraps up to make the mosaic of your identity. If you were to picture, this is what rest is for me, Steve. Describe that for us. And then we'll invite Jordan up here to close us out.
I don't know that I fully know the answer. I mean, I've shared little snippets of things I've discovered for myself, but one of the things is kind of the topic of this talk tonight is fulfilling work. For me, fulfilling work is part of that definition of rest. And so I had to get over a lot of hurdles of being okay with that, because that felt a little too selfish or too privileged. But I really think we're we're designed and built to do certain things in the world through our work. And I think when you're doing what you're made to do, it does have fulfillment inherent to it.
Yeah.
So that to me is a big part of it. And then one of the things I'm really struggling with and trying to learn at this point in my life is the part of rest that is like my marriage and my friendships. And I don't make enough space for it. And I'm realizing how much I don't even think about that aspect. Yeah. So that's one that I'm not sure what the answer is, but I've been on a journey lately of, oh, okay. I mean, when I left the corporate world and started my business, I started to realize, whoa, I've given zero attention to my marriage.
Yeah.
And we are struggling because of it. We look good on the surface, but man, we're struggling. We're not connected. And so we started like really doubling down on putting intentional time and effort into our marriage. Yeah. And now I'm realizing, whoa, there's so much growth we could have here and so much more that I want in that area, for example. Yeah. But it feels like I'm just, it's like I just saw the tip of the iceberg. There's probably way more underneath. Yeah. So that's the part I have no idea, but I'm really giving a lot of thought to lately.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, keep us informed. I want to hear where your thoughts lead you, because I think you might have something to teach me. At this point, can we just put our hands together and say thank you to Steve? This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Jordan, come on up, my friend.
All right, so I'm going to close us out, but you don't have to rush out of here. We have the room for a little while longer, and we would love to stay and talk. I know, Steve, you've said you'll stay and chat with people if they want to. If you're like me, and actually as soon as you all went into table discussion, Steve and I turned to each other, we were like, well, that was about as deep as we could have gone. We could have talked for 2 more hours. So Needle's Eye, because of that, we've been cultivating this kind of conversation on work and rest for, like I said, for about 5 months. You can find a lot of the videos from the other speakers we've had on our YouTube page or on our social medias. You can find clips. And we're having a lunch at our office in a few weeks, a free lunch, to continue this conversation on work and rest. So this is something we're trying to create space for. We do these kinds of things and industry cohorts and all kinds of fun stuff all throughout your work week. And so if you want to learn more, or if you want to get our emails or whatever, this card is on your table, and you can either be old school and use a pen, if anyone has a pen, or you can scan the QR code and do that. And we'd love to connect with you. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Hardywood. Make sure if you got a drink that you close out your tab. And this was just a great night. Anything else we need to say? I don't think so. So I don't know why I asked you and then answered. Yeah. See, look at that. I delegated and took it back. Look at that. That was right there. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. Have a good night, but also stick around and chat. And there's actually kind of a lot more pizza if you want to eat more. Okay.